This is Pastor Matt Smith, Senior Pastor of Barabbas Road Church. For the past 16 years, it has been my joy to equip the saints for the work of the ministry by preaching the Bible verse by verse, line by line, the whole counsel of God. Our audio and video messages have reached over 158 countries and are listened to by over 5,000 people each week. Many of you who listen weekly have been through our doors, and I'm thankful that you continue to use us as a resource for your enrichment and edification. We consider you all a part of our extended church family. As you know, San Diego is a spiritually dark and financially difficult place to exist as a local church, and yet, by God's plan and purpose, He's placed us here to boldly challenge the false faith by teaching that Jesus is the only way, truth, and life. My desire is that we would continue to be a bastion of light in this dark area, that we would keep bringing you consistent biblical teaching on a weekly basis. To that end, I'm asking that you would prayerfully consider partnering with us in your missions giving. To do so, go to barabbas.com/give. I'm thankful for this task and look forward to our partnership for years to come.
I'm glad you guys are here. So, and Happy New Year. This is the beginning of the new year, and we're not starting a new book. So, I disciplined myself to not change and stay in the book. So the plan, real quick, just to reiterate, is to finish this book. We're in chapter 8, so I think there's 16 or so. So I don't know, maybe another couple months. Finish this book, and then I think the plan next is to go into Strange Fire, and we're going to talk about kind of charismatic excess, and then we'll see what happens from there. So hopefully Christ comes back, and we don't have to worry about it. But tonight we're going to talk about Hindu-based cults. So before we get into it, let me just say a prayer and go from here. So, Lord, what a privilege it is to get to have these apologetics nights. I know there's Adventure Club happening upstairs, and there's all sorts of things. This is truly the beginning of the new year for us, and Lord, we live in Southern California, and there's a lot of the Hindu-based cult stuff even here in this area. We have swamis, we have all the yoga stuff. It's kind of everywhere. Give me clarity of speech. Help us to have compassionate hearts, and give us divine appointments with people, and bring many people into this church that come from this background. Help us to bear fruit from all this. We praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so let's just talk real quick. So the basic premise of what this book is we're going through the cults, not merely just to kind of watch out. That's not the goal. The goal isn't to say, hey, watch out for the cults. That's not the point. The goal tonight, as with all these books, and Ron Rhodes' book called The Challenge of the Cults, is to go through these cults and understand what the worldview issues are that they have, so you're better able to share the gospel with them. That's the number one thing. And understand that like everyone's different, but if you know what the main issue is, it helps to know kind of what to dismantle. Again, I use the Angry Birds analogy. I want to remind you of it. I think it's helpful. If you ever play, there's a video game where you can play on your phone or tablet or whatever called Angry Birds. It's been out since, 2007 or something, I'm sure. And you shoot a little bird in a thing. When you first start, you just get a red bird. It can hit everything. But as you play, you get more birds. They do different things. Some guys split into little guys. Someone's a big fat bird. One guy drops an egg and it explodes things. It's a fun game. The point being is the tower in front of you dictates the kind of bird you want to use. If you shoot the little bluebirds into this I played the other day, so I'm thinking about it. You shoot the bluebirds into the stone tower, what a waste, But if you see glass, the bluebirds do a good job. All that to say, when we first start sharing the gospel with people, we first start telling people about Jesus, everyone's a nail because we're a hammer. And if all you are is a hammer away, guys. I'd rather you use what God gave you. If all you have is brashness, then be brash. I'd rather you share the gospel, and if all you know is one mode and tone, then do it. I'd rather that happens than not. However, as we get better, it's nice to have more tools in the belt, and precision helps. And so it's a much easier to dismantle a worldview, to understand where the gospel is relevant. And also sometimes when we understand, when we preach the gospel, when we explain the gospel to friends, so often, it's been said this way, if we agree with everything except in the one area that person is in disagreement with you, and you just kind of let that fly, we really didn't communicate the gospel. In other words, Jesus isn't a God among other gods. He's not the self-help God. If we present him where he seems reasonable, but the one area that person's struggling with, we just kind of ignore, we really didn't preach the Jesus that is the King of all kings, the Lord that's not just, that matters. It matters, that precision. And so understanding Hindu-based cults is tricky because for most of us, we don't really think that we're exposed to this. But here's the funny part about this chapter. We're actually, here in Southern California, very exposed to a lot of Hindu-based cults. And I would say largely it's coming in two ways. One, straight up through Hindu-based cult stuff, through like yoga type stuff, okay? Which brings up the second point, which is we've already covered, which is New Age. So a lot of the Eastern stuff we're going to get, really comes to us as an Americanized version in the New Age teaching. And so even though we've covered New Age, this is more sort of the actual Hindu-based cults, it all sort of can apply into this mesh sandwich. Some of it's still true. So let's just kind of talk about this. Basically, 700 million Hindus at the time of this writing, which was 20 years ago, live in India, which constitutes at that time about 82% of India's population. So 82% of India's population is Hindu, and India, that's kind of the idea, and approximately 13% of the world's population is Hindu. That's a big percentage. More than 1 million Hindus lived in North America at the time of the writing of this book, and that number had been steadily growing till now. I don't know what it is today, but it's more than that. The religious landscape in the West has been powerfully impacted by Eastern ideas. There's no disagreement from this. Really, we're going to see is this came in the 60s, but as Os Guinness said, the East is still the East, but the West is no longer the West, and this is really key. What this again, back 20 years ago when this was written, this was true, but even more so now. And I want to kind of, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that sort of the cultural moment we're in. So if we understand that as Americans, we've been seeing the biggest push against the West. In the 60s, it looked a lot like the Hindu-based stuff. And then as you look most recently, we've seen it come through more of a kind of Eastern Bloc communism in the shape of Black Lives Matter and like the Marxism that we've seen kind of come out. That's, I think, dead. I truly think that's going to be dead, which means sort of the type of cultural influence that's pushed us towards sort of a Marxist view, I think that's going to go away, and we're going to see a lot more of the New Agey type view be the more mainstream stuff that we see pushed, but we'll find out. But in both cases, the argument has been against the West. Now, what does the West mean when you think about that, the West versus the East? The West, when you think of the Western world, is think of American values. That's the West. That's the sort of the presuppositions. And so for many people, the Western answers no longer seem to fit the questions that people are asking. With Christian culture disintegrating and humanism failing to provide alternatives back after World War II and whatnot, many were searching in the ancient East, and they found it in the 60s. But the question is, how did we get such a thinking? How did this come about? So we're going to talk about the 60s for a minute and the counterculture. And again, this seems irrelevant to us today. It's absolutely not. Make sure we don't miss it. So the counterculture of the 60s, think about the Beatles for a second. If you look at any album from the 60s in music, you're going to see Eastern influence. And so the Beatles had their albums, and by the time you get to the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album or whatever it's called, it has a picture of all these guys, and they went to India, and they went to gurus, and you see a bunch of Indian influences on their albums. I mean, U2 had the same type of thing where they had their India moment. All these musicians, that's much later, they have their India moment. It came to the pop culture and the LSD culture. But really, the counterculture of the 60s played a key role in exposing us in the West to Eastern religions. So James Sire, author of The Universe Next Door, believes that the openness to Eastern ideas among the Western youth of the 60s was largely a reaction against traditional Western values. Now, this is what I want to make sure we don't miss. There's an appetite in our culture, and so we're in a romantic moment. And what I mean is, with the election we just had, and going the way it went, there was a large-scale rejection of censorship. There was a large-scale rejection of sort of big government sort of solutions. Like, those are really good, positive things. But that doesn't mean that here in the West, here in America, there is an appetite for truly Western values that's like real. In other words, there's an entire cohort, I mean, at least half the country, that doesn't like Western values. I mean, and I mean that to say the meritocracy that people are so willingly to put away with things like equity and that has to go somewhere. And so, in one sense, when you can't turn to the Marxism, well, you can turn to the East. It's always there. Sire says that with its anti-rationalism, okay, so let's break down some of these terms. Rationalism is the idea, and this is all Western, because we believe, and if you don't understand how Christian this is, that God made the universe, but God is not the universe. You guys will follow that? There's God, and he made everything, but everything is not God. God is distinct from the universe. Now, why is that? Why does that give us Western ideas? Science, we've covered this over and over. This needs to be in your head. When you believe that God's part of everything, why would you do an experiment? I'd say to you, hey, why is the tree do that? Because God made it that way. But if you know that God made an ordered universe, but God himself is not the universe, When I say to you, why does this happen? I know that there must be order there, which gives me a motivation to do experiments. I know that every effect has a necessary cause. That comes from the idea that there is a God who made an ordered universe, but he himself is not the universe. All of Western science, all of Western scientific endeavors have been motivated by this premise. That is the West. Absolutely, these presuppositions, ordered universe, a material universe made by an immaterial God, the universe itself not being God, but made by an ordered God. That's Western. That gives us Western ideas. The Eastern idea mashes that together and says, no. It's a rejection of this, all right? It is anti-rational, all right? It's syncretistic. So syncretism is, let's add it all together. It's both and. So what we say is, in a Western view, there's right and wrong. Truth exists, which means the opposite of truth is not true, right? Syncretism says, well, 1 + 1 can equal 2, but also maybe 3. Like, that's alien thinking to Western thinking, because Western thinking, you use logic. A doesn't equal non-A. That's rational, that's logical. Syncretistic says, let's put it all in a sandwich, and they both go together. The West is the opposite, very active. The Eastern view is very much a quietism. The Western view, the Western philosophy has been the development of technology, and the Eastern view tends to, you couldn't dismiss technology and promote an uncomplicated lifestyle, which we're going to find out actually isn't true. And it's radically different in its religious framework. And in the East, and because people want to find something exotic, it's extremely attractive. What do you mean it's extremely attractive? It feels cool. I'm into meditation and yoga. There's a guy I met the other day, nice guy, I'm sure he's great. And I was doing jujitsu with him, so it's a small world, so whatever. But hopefully we don't meet him. Hopefully he comes to church. Okay. Hopefully he doesn't realize I'm talking about him is what I mean. But anyways, we're talking about, hey, what do you do for a living? He goes, oh, I teach yoga. And I'm like, oh. He goes, what do you do? I'm a pastor. He goes, oh, really? Oh, that's cool. I bet it's great. I'm like, I actually teach against yoga. What? I'm like, let's be friends. And so he laughed. It was good. Then we did jiu-jitsu, and I beat him up, so I'm happy with that. But then we talked afterwards, like, tell me about your journey. And he's telling me about this yoga stuff. And it was interesting how, like, he's used to people being like, that's so cool. Because it is. When you're here, it's like, it's so cool. Oh, you meditate all day? Oh, you do splits? Oh, you feel like you got to get rid of the time? I'm like, and I was not buying it, but like, it's cool. People love it. Many Americans have concluded that the East, the quiet land of meditating gurus and the simple life, gives us the answer to our craving for meaning and significance. We want the wise guy in the cave to tell you what's up. That's Eastern. All right? Western philosophy is not wise guy in a cave. It's Benjamin Franklin. It's figuring stuff out, it's tinkering with stuff, it's lightning bolts, okay? It's experimentation. That's America ingenuity, hard work. We are the best country on God's green earth because we've taken biblical presuppositions. True story. Eastern stuff's like, you got to find the excellent guru. It's Gnosticism personified. If you don't know if you've been following me, that's a big statement. Gnosticism is the idea that there are step-by-step sort of like ladders to enlightenment, okay? And that if you can ascend each step, and so the Bible writes against kind of a proto-Gnosticism. It's the idea that the world is, you can ascend away from matter. Hindu-based religions are Gnosticism personified usually in gurus. You find these gurus and you collect them. It's kind of like Pokemon, right? You get the next one up, and you can go up as you go. 30 years ago, the United States, you might have thought that the word guru was like something you eat, or like something weird, like what in the world is that? Again, this was 30 years ago, 20 years ago. So let me say 50 years ago, okay? What year was it 50 years ago? It's probably 1990. What was 50 years ago? Someone tell me. 75. Wow. Golly. All right, I should have done that faster. 1975, you're like, what's a guru, right? And people are like, oh, is that like a kind of car? Or what is that? What is that? Today, because of things like Zen and other Eastern disciplines, it's like a household word. We're used to that. Well, you might have your coffee thing that says, Om, it's Monday, or like Zen to Tuesday, or whatever your yoga pants say. We got the Lululemon pants, the whole thing. A guru, though, is an enlightened master, literally a God man. And so many view the Eastern gurus as a man who is in his last of many thousands of reincarnations. Now, so here's what's funny. The Western folks, we will wink and nod at this. We're like, we'll play the game. Like, okay, I'll play, you're the master. But we just like the look of it. But when you actually start thinking, do people really believe it? Yeah, they do. I mean, this is what it is. There's a guy he's the guru because he's accumulated an enormous wealth of spiritual knowledge and power, because he's logged countless years over many lifetimes along the spiritual path. Again, if you stop and think about this, you're saying that this person is basically like the Highlander. Does anyone know that's too old? The Highlander, there can be only one. Who's never heard of the Highlander in here? Let me see him. Oh my goodness. The story, let me explain the Highlander. The Highlander is a story about an immortal guy who can live forever. This is important. It's a new year. He can live forever, but if there's another immortal around, you have to cut his head off so you can keep your immortal status because there can be only one, and so you have to carry a sword at all times because you're a Highlander. Anyways, that's good. Anyways, these guys are basically Highlanders that don't cut off heads. Not typically, right? So they've lived 1,000 lives, because when you look back, it's kind of like let me come up with a pop culture thing you might know. Okay, the story of Wolverine, right? Remember when Wolverine fought in World War II, then he fought in Vietnam? Who doesn't know what I'm talking about? When you look at his history, right? That's the gurus. That's basically what we're saying, is that they've been reincarnated so many times and they remember all of their wisdom so they can talk to you. So it's kind of like, remember we talked about the mind sciences earlier where they said, oh, this happens and you don't remember your past lives, and it's like subconscious up there? These are gurus that have actually have sort of they're a black belt in life because they've gone through so many reincarnations. They've played the Mario Brothers of life so many times, they're on level whatever, right? So some of these guys, so we're talking about one guy's named Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. He's one of the more prominent gurus in the 60s. There's a bunch of names you're not going to know. Swami Muktananda was another guy. We have swamis over here. We have all this stuff. There's a bunch of dudes. They're great. But all these guys, what they basically did is they brought the East to the West, and really in their doctrines of monism and pantheism. Now, again, we are Americans and through, and yet, as Americans, we have a very our presuppositions are built in the Declaration of Independence, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident. We have value because we're made in the image of God. We've been made in the image of our Creator. Eastern pantheism does not say that. It says that we are God. We're all part of God. And so because instead of saying that God made the world and the world's not God, no. We're all part of God. We're all part of the world. It just mashes everything. It's oneism. And so that's Eastern. Now that comes to us today when years ago, SeaWorld had the show Believe, and it was the boy. The old SeaWorld, when it was cool, when you could actually go in the pool with Shamu, right? Now you can't go in the pool with Shamu because it killed someone or something. And it's not even Shamu because they keep getting new whales and renaming it Shamu, but it's not the same whale. But anyways, in this show, they have on the big screen the whale, and the boy paddles out in his kayak, and he has a bond with the whale, kind of like Free Willy, right? There's a movie Free Willy. And he has a little whale tail necklace, and it says, believe, believe. And the reason they like saying the believe is that if you're a Christian, you're like, oh, see, it's talking about faith, it's great. But what they're actually advocating is believe. Believe what? They never tell you the content of belief. It's very Eastern. Because the implication is believe what? And it talks about the communication and oneness with the whale. And then the message that was sort of subtexted in there was believe that we're really one. I'm one with you, whale, you're one with me. We're all one. Music does this all the time. I mentioned U2 and their album Achtung Baby. They had that song called One. And the whole song is literally the most Eastern song you can come up with. He's like, we're all one, you and me, I, you, we're all together, we're all one. And it's a really good song, by the way, but very Eastern. That's the idea. That's East. The doctrines that come through all this, okay, the doctrines not only help set aside the idea of a personal creator God who has a personality in Christianity, but it also contributed greatly to the growth of moral relativism in America, because if all is one and all is God, then the distinction between good and evil is blurred and obliterated. What do I mean by this? At the same time these Eastern views were coming in, okay, into popularity in the 60s, it was the same time that Francis Schaeffer talks about in the 60s what we called anti-art, for example. And so what it was trying to do, and we still have this today, it was the idea of art for the sake of daring you to say, says who. In other words, one artist, I've brought this example up because it's so helpful. One famous art exhibit that came out years ago with modern art, this is what modern art is it took religious symbols and then it superimposed on those religious symbols pornographic images. And this would be in very famous museums, is you'd see a statue of the Virgin Mary made of poop, literally. You'd see another picture of, the Pope, but there was something else that would have a naked people all over it. And so what the artist was trying to say is that our categories are false, that everything we look at as sacred is also profane. And if nothing is sacred or nothing is profane, then everything's sacred, everything's profane. There's no categories. That's what art's trying to do. So when someone puts the toilet seat in the middle of the thing, and you're like, wait, I just went in the urinal, I saw a toilet seat, but now this is art. They're challenging you to say, what really makes art art? There's no categories. We made it all up. It's arbitrary. That's very Eastern. So at the same time modern thinking was doing this in its music, in its museums, in its art, right? We had the Eastern religion coming through at the spiritual side of things saying, we're all one. All right, so at the same time, you could see like Satan's real. Like this is a constant onslaught that came in at the same time. You guys all follow what I'm saying? This is kind of a big deal when it all was happening at the same time. And so then we started obliterating categories of good and evil. A detailed history of Hinduism is way beyond the scope of the chapter. We're not going to spend much time on it. But basically to put forward, Hinduism really has no specific founder, and there's not really a specific date that you could cite for its founding. I'm going to say it this way. What we're going to see is when you think of Hinduism, I want you to think of good old-fashioned paganism. It's just when you read the Bible and you talk about the Philistines and the different Eastern kind of, it's just like they worship Dagon, the fish god, and they had the multiple gods. Like, oh, it might be a different region. It's still the East. It's paganism. It's just paganism. Scholar Bruce Nichols observes that all the world's great religions, Hinduism's the most difficult to define. I think it's like the throwaway term. It didn't have any one founder. It has many scriptures, very similar to New Age. Nothing super authoritative, but everything has some authority, but nothing exclusively so. Hinduism thinks of itself more like a tree that's come gradually into fruition, just naturally from the world. So if we're going to put it anywhere, you could say basically 1500 BC. And so kind of you put that in time period, you're like Isaiah, it's before, like 700 years before Isaiah's writing about the Babylonians. Does that help like a little bit what we're talking about here? During that time, we have the Vedic literature composed of over a 1,000-year period. The Veda is a Sanskrit word that means knowledge or wisdom. And the Hindu Vedas are the Riga Veda, Samaveda, Yajur Veda, and the Atharva Veda, and Vel Veda too, I'm sure, somewhere or other. They're the earliest Hindu scriptures, and they communicate spiritual knowledge, mainly giving priests instructions for performing rituals and providing information regarding the mystical and symbolic meaning of these rituals. So what's funny about this is when you think of like wisdom literature, we think of advice. We're Western. We think of, oh, this is going to be wisdom literature. It's going to tell you, like, when you buy 2 cattle, make sure you save 1. Like, oh, like, that's so helpful. Oh, we think of, like, the I Ching, like, oh, when you go somewhere, go nowhere first. You're like, oh. First, before you fill the cup, you must empty your hand. You're like, oh. That's not it. The video is like, it's things like, when you cut a throat of a thing, make sure you hold the cup this way, and it has to be swished. And you're like, that's not what we think of, but we romanticize it into these, like, secret. It's kind of like, the best way I can describe how we've westernized this is back in the day when you watched movies, right? Let's say we're going to break into the bank. We're going to go to the bank, and you guys are going to help me break into the bank. And one of you is a hacker, and they're with me, and they always have their computer in front of them. They're like, hey, we're trying to get in the bank. Can you check? Hold on. Oh, it says this thing. Like, what are they typing? Where do they go? What is that? If you actually do hacking, it probably doesn't look exactly like that. Maybe it does, but I doubt it. That you have a computer that looks like it's made of metal that you can carry, like, oh, let me check the thing. Oh, the government, I just hacked their thing. It becomes magical thinking, right? We do that with these. We romanticize this idea that the Vedas are something you'd want to read, and even Velveeta that you want to eat. Like, do we really want to eat Velveeta? I don't even know. But the basic idea, these things communicate spiritual knowledge, and the knowledge is supposed to be transmitted originally orally, then it was put down in written form. Again, very ritualistic. Ancient Hindu Brahmin priests believed the Sanskrit was the language of the gods, and that through the Sanskrit language, supposedly it conferred the Vedas to the ancient sages of India. Again, make sure you don't miss this, basic paganism. So the Bible against pagans, this is basic Eastern paganism. That was just the kind of peasant paganism from the ancient Eastern world. The ancient Hindu religion in this way was basically polytheistic in nature, many gods, meaning they believed in many gods in this way, and there's a strong emphasis on giving ritual offerings to the various deities. Because, like, so example, you see the story with Jonah and the big fish, right? And Jonah's going, he's fleeing to Tarshish, the opposite direction of going to Nineveh. And as he's going, there's a big storm. And they're like, what God do you worship so we can sacrifice to him, right? And he says, throw me in. And then they end up, says they worship the God of the Bible. It doesn't mean they became believers, guys. I mean, they added the worship of the God of the Bible to the worship they had of all their other gods. They're like, well, we like the God of the sea. At one point when the Assyrians were coming against Hezekiah, and if you remember in this story, the Assyrians, Sennacherib, is accusing Hezekiah. He's like, how could you stand against me? You've gotten rid of all your idols and all your gods. All you're left with is just one puny God, but we have all the gods, and we're going to come against you. And so that's when, remember the prophet, and he gets Hezekiah, and he's told to tell him, we found Hezekiah's toilet, where Hezekiah took all the idols that the Jews were worshiping, they were crapping on them, and it's a true story because they're like, we went back to the one true God. Hezekiah started celebrating the Passover. Well, remember, ancient polytheistic sort of paganism was, we've got all the gods, you only have one. And so when you read the Old Testament, when you read the Bible, he's like, there's no other God but God. And that thing, in our language, we're used to monotheistic culture, but the claims of the Bible are just giant punches in the face. When you actually assert for a minute polytheism, the biblical claims that God is all there is, all that ever was, that he's the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning, the end. There's no God but God. This is the only God. He's the true God. He's the God of the earth, the sky, the one. He made the world. He didn't just, when he went against the Egyptians, right? He didn't just bring them out. He took the gods of the Nile and he humiliated them. Oh, you like the God of the Nile? I'm going to turn the Nile to blood. Oh, you have a God of fertility and frogs? I'm going to make frogs annoy you so you want to kill them. Like, God, he humiliates them. So a big part of the Bible was humiliating the plurality of gods. And this is very much Hindu, okay? So these gods would be personifications of natural forces, right? Such as the storm, the sun, the moon, and the fertility of the soil. Eventually, certain gods became preeminent, gods like they said called Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. By 1000 BC, a class of priests known as Brahmins emerged who were devoted to the ultimate reality, or Brahman. And so during this time, Indian society began to be segregated into classes according to a system of classification known as Varyan, which means color. Okay? These classes included Brahmins, which were priests, Kshatriyans, which were warriors or rulers, Vaisyas, or merchants, and Sudras, laborers and servants. And there were also untouchables who were below this that were forbidden contact with the other groups because they were regarded as impure. Eventually, this evolved into what's today, and it's still in place, known as the caste system, and it's absolutely in place today in India. So when someone tells you they loved Gandhi, oh, Gandhi's so great, he loves the poor people. Gandhi's believed in the caste system, which was essentially indentured slavery for everything. The caste system, let me explain it to you a minute. The caste system is cosmic identity politics, okay? It's the idea that you're in the position you're in based on your caste, how you were born, and that's because of something that happened to you in a previous life, so you deserve it. So in a caste system, so identity politics says, you were born in Mexico, you're a Mexican person, well, you must like tamales. And we would say, gosh, that's like kind of a stereotype, or that's even like people, or the thing of their character, content of their character, not the color of skin. And we say, oh, you like tamales? You must be from Mexico. You're like, no, I'm from Afghanistan and I like tamales. You can't like tamales, that's cultural appropriation. And I'm like, what kind of food can I like? I'm American, what do I like? Hot dogs? That's from Germany. Is it though? French fries, hamburgers, who can have a hamburger? Hamburger? I can't have that. So cosmic culture, the untouchables, they couldn't do anything. And here's the worst part about it. There's no grace. There's no climbing out of it. There's no getting better. It's so fascinating to me that the reason I'm bringing this up, and I'm kind of belaboring this point for a minute, is the same crap we got from Marxism when it went from economics into identity politics is basically now going to be, it's very popular in sort of Eastern thinking already, which is cosmic identity politics. In other words, you cannot help but do the things you do because of your caste, because of where you came from. There's nothing you can do to get out. There's no grace. You just have to die and get reincarnated to a better spot. That's terrible. We would be against this. In fact, one of the reasons that Christians are persecuted by Hindus in India and other people is because as they share the gospel, people from the lower castes realize that they have value in the image of God. Well, that is a threat, a big threat. Now keep in mind, this is not just a threat to people's oh, you believe this, now it's different. This is a threat to the very fabric of Indian society in this way. And so in the same way that the book of Acts, you see all the silversmiths bonding together to oppose the Apostle Paul because they're idol makers and they're going out of business because people are coming and selling their books of magic and coming to Christ, right? In the same way in India, as people are going into these Indian areas and preaching the gospel to people that are in a lower caste, and they're all of a sudden people like, wait, I have value just the same as this other person, that there's value in the image of God. All of a sudden it's upending society. You could see. So the reason I bring this up is we in the West will romanticize sort of these religions. We wear the yoga pants, we go to the class, we carry our little mat around. We're like, okay, I'm really spiritual now. Most of us wouldn't actually articulate we like the caste system. This is one of those helpful moments of the gospel. Oh, you're into all this. What do you think of the caste system? That's what those stretches that the God you're talking to likes. You cool with that? It's helpful to know, what they believe. Most people are like, no, I don't like the caste system. So you're just pretending to you like some of it, you get to pick of it. Like, no, I just like the stretches. I'm like, well, that's not yoga, is it? Like, you can't you can't just dabble. It's not like cosplay. Like, I'm gonna take a little bit of this. So you gotta remind them of the dirty laundry of the caste system, right? Again, according to the whole point, the reason that you go in one caste or another is based on karma. How's another one? When you think of karma, what do we think of? Something bad happens, and I don't know, you're working at the liquor store with Joe, and then, oh, that shelf falls over. Oh, man, you have that's bad karma. Like, it sounds like the thing you say that, oh, so you must have done something bad, so something bad happened. That's not karma. Karma is something bad happened to you because you did something in your previous life. That's what karma is. It's way less sexy. It's way less you did this because this happened, right? There's a little bit of it. There's karma is the idea that you deserve what happens to you. So when someone, and here's why I'm belaboring this right now. This is what I want to do. This is my whole point of this. When someone says that they're following this type of view, especially in the West, because presumably most of us are here when we're going to encounter this, so you can't allow the person to get off the hook by their spirituality, because here's the point. Someone from this background, when someone's suffering, the Hindu person has to believe that they deserve it. Does that make sense? So if you meet someone who's in Hindu, this is, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I want to do this. Like, so when Francis Schaeffer talks about this, we say, when someone has a belief that's untenable, they can't live it out, rather than say, nah, that's not true, X, Y, or Z, we have to force them to live it out. So what would that look like? Oh, what happened? You send your kid off to college, and they go to college, and they come back, you're like, what's your name? My name is now Dancing Feather, dancing whatever. My name is, Marasha, Hesha, whatever. I decided to meditate all day. I'm going to go meditate in my room. I'll be out for dinner later. Okay, what happened to my son? He's going to meditation conferences. He's doing yoga. He's got a man bun. He's into it. Nothing wrong with man buns. What do? How do you reach him? Everything you say sounds antiquated, right? So what do you do? Because again, hardcore Hindu in India, I'm not even dealing with that right now, right? That's different. That's a culture. It's a whole thing. I'm talking about the person here that embraces it. I started going to yoga. I got into it. My guru is over here. I'm going to a seminar. All right. When they're with their friend, and their friend is suffering, and you say, that's pretty rough, huh? They're like, no, according to your view, they deserve it, right? Like, why are you, like, they deserve that? That's karma. They're getting what they deserve. Like, they need to realize suffering's an illusion, and they need to just, be happy right now and get over it. That's untenable. Do you understand? And it's at that moment that they want to jump into the Western view of, I care for you, oh, that's a bummer. Like, no, you don't get to have that. You don't get to do that. What are you talking about? If it's a bummer, and then you're saying things ought to be a certain way, which isn't like the categories don't exist. So just keep in mind what I'm trying to say. The lower status, the karmic consequences, you can't fix it. And so you also, as a believer, or as a person going around, as if you're a Hindu believer, you can't adequately help, which is why the caste system makes sense. The untouchable, they deserve it. So the person that's going to go clean the gutters, that's going to go do the things you don't look at, they deserve the place they're in the Indian caste system. Do you guys all follow that? We can't sort of romanticize it, and people do. So every person in this case is viewed as being on a wheel of life, and salvation essentially involves breaking away from this wheel via reincarnation. The goal is to break the cycle of karma and samsara and be free from the burden of life. And salvation comes when one realizes that one's individual soul, Atman, is identical with the universal soul, Brahman. So let's break this apart just a tiny bit. In the Eastern, one of the main things that separates the biblical view of history to all pagan views of history is the difference between a linear view of history, where history is going someplace. Okay, so the Bible, there's a beginning. Okay? In the beginning, God said, God created the heavens and the earth. There's a beginning. All right? And then it moves to where? An ending. In the book of Revelation, right, there's a happy ending. There's an end in sight where the glory of God is the one that shines in the city, where people are without tears in their eyes. History is moving in a linear fashion towards God's intended purpose, which is good for those that believe in him, and those that aren't, that's good for them too in the worst way possible. So, but the idea that history is linear, you guys all follow that? That's very Western, which tells us there's a person, right? There's a plan, there's a purpose in the historical things that are happening. Eastern views do not see a linear history, okay? They view everything as a wheel of constant cycles, right? And so that constant cycle, there's no purpose in going forward. It's just a repetition of the same game. Now, we bring this in. I remember a book I used to like by Robert Jordan when he was alive. It was called The Wheel of Time. And what's interesting is the whole book, and not to give it away, but it's a ginormous set of books that gets really old for a while. Some people love it. Sorry, Bryant. But Robert Jordan, I think, ends up dying, and then another guy, Brandon Sanderson, finished it off. He did a good job, but still. In the book, he talks about the Wheel of Time, but what he did is he took the Christian symbol. This guy is called the Dragon Reborn, is this dude, and he's basically like a Christ figure. And they took all the Christian language and put it in. Herbert did the same thing with Dune. But then on top of it, they added Eastern stuff and took the Christian view and then made it a cycle, because every certain cycles you get this thing. And by doing that, they completely undermined all the Christian stuff and really just subsumed it by the Eastern view. Dune does the same thing. So all these books written during this time, all this stuff, everywhere around you, you're getting Eastern stuff. So when you think cycles and repetition, that's it. But here's the crazy part. When you think of reincarnation, you think reincarnation to awesomeness. No. And this Hindu idea is that reincarnation is to stop getting reincarnated. The goal is to stop it, stop the cycle. It's to get off the bus. It's to cease. Now, how does that happen? You stop existing as you. The problem with your life is there's too much you in it. And the Hindu religion says the only answer is for you to stop being you, for you to just realize you're part of everything, which makes you nothing and everything. But guess what's in the way? Your personality. Hinduism is decidedly non-self. The whole point of meditation is not to think on a subject, it's to literally empty your mind to be a non-thinker. It's to make yourself to cease to exist in those moments, to quiet your mind, but not to do anything positive, but to cease to exist. You are the offense in Hinduism. Now, this is actually decidedly more negative than most Westerners like. We talk about reincarnation as, I used to be a pirate. I can tell because I just love saying R. I saw this thing and I realized in my other life I was whatever you come up with. Everyone has a romantic thing. Oh, I bet I was an adventurer, But the Hindu thing is like suffering. You got to end the suffering. And how do you end it? Stop being. Like stop being you, particularly. It's a big change. So to help you do that, Brahmin priests were held in high regard. They were the ones who engaged in the crucial rituals that could control the gods. Again, the gods, not God, because everyone's part of it. Inevitably, because Brahmin priests were the highest caste in any society, there's a lot of abuses that developed. These Brahmins lorded it over those of the lesser caste. And so a world religion specialist named Dean Halverson tells us that as a result of the emphasis on rituals, the priests became the sole means by which the people could approach and appease the gods. Essentially, like kind of what's happening in the media, right? The media, we don't like, the legacy media doesn't like that there's alternative forms of media where you can get information. So what do they want to do? We want to be the sole source. And so with the Brahmins, they're like, no, we're the only way to come through this to the gods. The priests gained an increasing amount of power and control over the lives of people, but by the 6th century BC, people could not tolerate the abuse, and so they end up revolting against it. And so out of this conflict, new religions were born, such as Buddhism and Jainism. And from this revival, Brahmanism, that took place, relationships between the gurus and students changed. So now spiritual knowledge wasn't just lorded over, but passed on to individual seekers. And so it resembles more what we see today. And so notice he said Buddhism and this and that. I'm kind of lumping Eastern religions a little bit in together, but we'll kind of break them apart later. But 6 major schools of Hindu thought were dominant in the 1st century in India. So Nyaya and Vyas, I'm sorry guys, Vyas, I'm not even going to announce them. I will do no service, but one of them's yoga, all right? Yoga, let me try it. Will you not be offended? Suma, don't get mad at me, okay? Let me try it. Give me a thumbs up if I get them right. Nyaya. Thumbs up? Okay. Vyasasika. Thumbs up? Don't lie, it's a sin. Okay. Samkhya. Oh, either you're lying or I'm doing it right. Yoga, okay, yoga. Okay, got it, yoga. Mimamsa. Oh, I got that one. I felt good, actually. And Vedanta. All right, good job. Thank you. I feel so great. I'm not a guru. All right, Vedanta ended up becoming the predominant school. It was based in the Upanishads, which the Hindu scriptures literally end or conclusion of the Vedas, okay? And this is 800 to 600 BC, just kind of understanding some history lesson. And so the Upanishads fundamentally teach that behind the many gods of Hinduism stands the one monistic reality of Brahman. Now, here's why I'm bringing this up to you right now. This is not decidedly that much different than Greek thought. What? What I'm trying to say is, Paul deals with it in the Greeks, and I'm trying to get you to see that all paganism at its heart is the same thing. The difference about reincarnation and dealing with that is different. But the basic ideas of polytheism are all the same, which is this. In the Greek system, you have the many gods. Oh, I've got Zeus, and I've got Hermes, and I've got Aphrodite, and I've got all these gods, but they can't really be gods because that implies that there's change. There's no, time isn't dealt with, so the Greeks believe that there's a God above all gods, called the unknown God, who Paul says, I come to bring you in Acts 17. I did one of my theses. I wrote a book about this. I come to present to you, I'm going to tell you who the unknown God is. The God that's before all things, that's above all things, that's above the Zeuses and the many gods that you have here. There's a God behind all things. Well, in the Hindu idea, they have the same idea. It's called Brahman. Okay, so what Paul comes to the Athenians, and he's like, I'm going to tell you his name. His name is the God of the universe. Ultimately, his name is Jesus. All right, so this is kind of the idea. So in this idea, every aspect of the universe, both animate and inanimate, shares the essentially divine nature. So this is something like that ant on the ground is as divine as you are. It's all one, right? So you can kind of think of like, kind of the video games, the guy's like, oh, the ant's crawling, the butterfly's flowing. It's all so nice. Okay, according to school of thought, every person possesses an individual soul known as an Atman, and this is related to the universal soul, the Brahman. And so the Hindus believe that their true selves extended from and on one with Brahman. And so through seemingly endless deaths and rebirths, one finally comes to realize that Atman is Brahman. All right? Indeed, human beings are souls, Atman, that are part of the great ocean of souls that make up Brahman. So this is similar to New Age. It's similar to the mind sciences. What's really interesting is, this is fascinating, you have the monotheistic religions, the Abrahamic religions, and then you have paganism. And the other Abrahamic religions that don't believe in Jesus ultimately are also unbelievers, but they're not in the same pagan place of things. What do I mean by that? All paganism is essentially the same in the end. Basically, you're all God. We're all God. We just don't realize it. That's essentially what we're getting to, right? I mean, in the middle of it, you might want stuff. I want fertility. I'm going to get an offering to this God. If you go to India, there's shrines everywhere. Like there's a God of the gas station. There's a God of the trees. There's a God of that river. There's a God of me. I'm not joking. There's thousands. There's unlimited. But because Vedanta Hinduism is monistic, distinctions are considered unreal. What do I mean by that? Well, when one perceives distinctions, it's just an illusion, Maya. And so a person's individuality, apart from Brahman, everyday world in which one lives, that which one sees, hears, and touches, is an illusion and a dream. Now, here's what's so fascinating about this. I don't want to run out of time, but again, this is where the new rehashed Hinduism comes about. Because what they're saying is your self is an illusion. That's the illusion is your sense of self. That's not real. The real you is the universe itself. Now, we have plenty of like superhero stories that basically get this idea that you start to be enlightened. You start to realize that you're one of everything. The Matrix Reloaded, when it goes to the final thing. The first one was great because it was deconstruction, but by the third Matrix, Neo was everything but nothing. He is the Matrix. Like, what is going on? That's weird. That's Eastern, right? Well, here's what's fascinating about this. This idea, that's the kids running around. Sorry, this just sounds like a thundering thing. It's not storming outside yet. But this idea of these individuality lives and stuff, that they're the illusion, the idea is for you to realize that you're part of one life by getting rid of that. Now, here's what's fascinating. On the other side of the spectrum, the other side of that same game, so the Hindus, everything's the same, we're all one, but flip it back over to Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris. And there's a guy named Rosenberg. And so atheistic philosophers, all right, over the new atheism, which is dead also, by the way, new atheism came about, and they said, listen, because material is all there is, then that means that your sense of self. In other words, what do I mean by that? So we would say, if I'm like me, and I go to war, and my arm gets cut off, and I come back later, and like this, I'm still me. We say that, right? Because we realize that I'm more than my body. I'm not less than my body, but I'm more than my body. I'm not just my body and component parts. There's a soul that makes up to me. Now, we make that far and say we're only a soul. That's the transgender thinking, right? My body doesn't matter. We say we're embodied souls. It's really key. Okay, so what that means is my soul, my sense of self exists outside of my parts. But if I'm materialistic, my sense of soul doesn't exist, that means your sense of self doesn't exist, which means the me that's standing before you right now is not the me that was here 5 minutes ago because I have skin cells falling off of me. I've sweat a little. I probably weigh less now than I did 5 minutes ago because I'm sweating. And so literally, if I'm just a material being, and that's all I am, the me that's standing before you was not here a minute ago. And so you're never existing in the present tense as anything. The me that was there yesterday, so what Sam Harris and the rest of Rosenberg said, you don't actually exist. Your sense of self is an illusion. It's an evolutionary adaptation to allow your cells to keep producing or something like that. So you have on the scientific side of people that reject. So do you see what happens when you accept, okay, I'm on one side, it's all spiritual, the other side is all this. You get to these wacky conclusions, and it's interesting how they kind of come together, both in the main rejection. And when you realize how the Bible gives us clarity, because you can recognize that the Richard Dawkins, the Rosenbergs that say that you're not a you, they still get married, they still like buy, when they go someplace, they pay for a meal, they're like, I paid it for him because he's me and I'm you. And I'm like, it's like Total Recall. Arnold Schwarzenegger looking at Arnold Schwarzenegger is like, I'm you and you're me. Like, they don't live that way. They don't go out and say, I'm hungry, and just put a hamburger in someone else's mouth, right? They live in the world where when they're hungry, they eat the hamburger in their mouth. So they can't live out in the same way. The Hindu that says this, it says, I'm the problem, they're full of all that, and keep in mind, they're people made in the image of God, which means they have all the same, what? Selfish notions. They're not living an alternative reality. They feel just as much pride and selfishness and judgment, and the only way they can get rid of it is to try to not think about it. Just just don't think about it. But it's still there. It's law. So all the crud, all the curse of the law is on you just as much when you want to try to be good by not being you, because you just can't get out of your own way. You're just too much you. So again, Hinduism tells you that your big problem is you've forgotten that you're God. And the answer is to forget that you're you. American Hinduism, the yoga is not that. It's like, you're the best and you're God. But real Hinduism is, God's the best, you should stop being you so you can be God. Most people don't really like that. Most people have their egos they like, but Hindus say it's bad. And so again, sometimes Hindus say that the early Christian, like Jesus was a guru. I'm like, I hate when people do that. So let's kind of go through some of their basic views, like kind of as we go against this. On one of the groups that I love this. First of all, the Hindus often assert that Jesus wasn't perfect. They say he's awesome, but he's obviously imperfect. They say because he was angry one time when he drove money changers out of the temple, and remember when he caused the fig tree to wither. He can't be God, just a good teacher. Notice how they judge the Bible based on that thing, and look how condemned they are. Jesus did good, Jesus did well, just not good enough. Anyways, let me teach you how you can do a good job. Hey, good job with that. Sometimes we say, no, that's not true. Again, Francis Schaeffer's point is, okay, it's true. How's it going? How you doing on that? I mean, Jesus isn't good enough, but you are? Oh, wow, sounds good. Enjoy coming into the caste system next life as a worm. I have no idea. If Jesus is not even good enough, think of the condemnation that they just casually put in. That's Romans 2. Just casually we don't believe that stuff. We have a religion of peace and love and awesomeness. But by the way, unless you're better than Jesus, you're going to continue to suffer forever. That sounds like hell. Hindus teach that Jesus didn't suffer, actually, though. Oh, wait. I thought life is suffering, but then Jesus didn't suffer on the cross? Well, because he was a man who had attained enlightenment, so, he couldn't feel the pain. And so Maharishi Mahesh Yogi said, it's a pity that Christ is talked of in terms of suffering, because he didn't suffer. He was above it. He didn't feel it. Suffering is an illusion, and he knew it. Wait. Okay, time out. So now Jesus didn't suffer for anyone's sins, and that means your suffering is an illusion. It's the ultimate, so look, I have a problem. I love my family, kids, wife, I love you. I'm so glad I didn't marry myself. I truly have compassion for them, and I have compassion mainly when I'm not with them. Meaning when I drive away, I'm like, God, please help them when they're sick. But when I'm with my family, and they'll attest to this, and they know I love them, I'm very affectionate. But when they get sick, I'm like, get up. Like, why? I'm like, you can do it. They're like, well, I'm like sick, I have a fever. I'm like, but is it really that bad? It's normal to have a fever. That's your body working. Everything's good. Let's keep going. Or you want to rest? Fine. Just get some sleep. And they're like, you're not soft. Where's oh, they're there. I'm like, I realized, man, it's like, imagine if I was a guru. I'm like, suffering. Imagine how unhelpful that is. I'm like, suffering. I'm like, meditate. What do you want me to tell you? My arm's broken. Weakling. What else do you have? Again, what I want to dismiss is the caricature of it, that it's this Gandhi's a good guy. Okay, that's what I'm trying to get you to see. This is a cruel religion. It puts law on people, and it makes you say that your suffering is an illusion. The Bible's so opposite of this. I want you to understand how offensive this is, because God's suffering is real and it's terrible, and God, who made everything, cares about your suffering, that he sent his son to die in your place. This is not a small thing, it's a big thing. Suffering is a huge thing. That God, he says he learned through suffering. What has he experienced? Humanity, and what he suffered. He was obedient to the point of death. So we have hope in suffering that says your suffering is real, and there's a purpose in every ounce of your pain. Because God has a purpose in history. It's not just an endless cycle of dumb suffering for no reason. But Christian, we have to understand the distinction here, because if we don't understand the great hope we have, well, the India Hindu version sounds kind of cool. Like, well, there's no suffering, just Hakuna Matata. Like, let's just think other things about it. That is law. Go to a hospital like that. Send Mr. Gandhi yoga guy to the hospital and tell everyone that. The person that's got in the car accident that's moaning, like, there's no suffering. Get rid of smack the medicine on the hand. What you need to do is realize it's not real. Like, it's just, I guess my point is, the apologetic for this is that they're living a fiction world. This is worse than cosplay, because at least cosplay, they wear a costume. Like, in this, you could just say stuff like, it's untenable to the max. And so, like, our apologetic is the real world. That's our apologetic, is the real world. The person saying these things cannot live it out. Everything they say is offensive to it. But here's when they can have the power to act awesome about it, is when they can make up what they like about it or not. What you have to do is, especially with New Age people, is get the New Age person to be nailed down to this. Because this is what it is. Otherwise, you just made up your own stuff, which is say, well, I did because I heard it from Scientology. Okay. Hare Krishna, not going to get into. They came to the airports a lot. Same stuff. You get it. The airport guys in the orange jumpsuits, you ever met? You guys know what I'm talking about? Same idea, okay? For them, their view is the way to get enlightenment is to sing and dance to Hare Krishna. Then you have to repeat the chant. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. And you say it, and it's like a magic chant, and it saves you. So literally, you connect yourself with, and so here's the key. To progress, you have to find a guru. He has to basically sponsor you, and then you go from there. So it's the ultimate sort of kind of picture, this guru sponsor. And so each one is supposed to find the way. But it's fascinating when you say all this, and you realize with Jesus, again on the road to Caesarea Philippi, in front of all the idols, and then he says, I'm the Christ. And then later he says at one point, I am the way, the truth, and the life. What does Hinduism say? There are many ways. What does Hinduism say? There is no truth. What does Hinduism say? Life is the problem. Jesus is like, I'm the life. I'm the truth. And I'm the way. Which means there is a way, that other ways aren't it. Which means if something's true, its opposite is false. Do you guys all follow what's at stake here? It's one of the most satanic views. And I hate saying it because there's wonderful people from all these places, but these are satanic views. These views cause suffering, untold suffering. The amount of poverty, the amount of unnecessary suffering, the devaluing of human life that comes from this. People, like Indian people, are much higher than their religion. Their religion, the things that these things say about humans, the things that these things say about God, they're dehumanizing to the max. The idea was for many people, the desire with worldly living is a big part of things. What do I mean by that? Well, the world, you want to kind of get free of it, so you have to what? Abstain from the world. This is what the Bible calls asceticism. So again, you notice how I keep relating this to basic paganism? Because they have the same idea. So one, you have the pagan version, which is you have the fertility goddesses that you say, hey, I want crops. So then you go in and you have literally sex with the prostitute to make you have crops. Well, people like that religion, and they say, no, that's too worldly. We've got to get rid of ourselves. So the other side of it is, no. And then what we need to do is you have to cut off your stuff, and you need to go sit in the desert, and that's the answer. And what Paul says at one point is that the asceticism and severity of the flesh does nothing to make us more godly. Not one bit. Nothing. It does nothing. It gives the appearance of self-made religion, but is of no value in stopping the indulgence of the flesh. The indulgence of the flesh could be the indulgence of the person that's going to the orgy, and it could be the indulgence of the person that's taking pride in their own self-righteousness because they're doing ascetic practices. Do you understand both problems is self, but the answer isn't annihilation. The answer is rebirth. New self, new will, regeneration. It's why what Jesus promises that we're born again. It's why we hope for a glorified body. Do you see what I'm saying? That's the better self. The glorified body. Christian, make sure your hope isn't just a disembodied hope, because then you have no answer for this. Our hope is that one day, okay, how about this? How many of you, it's a new year, how many of you can say, you made a commitment, you're going to read the Bible every day this year? Anyone made that commitment, something like that? How many of you want to admit you've already broken it? Anyone? Thank you. I've got a couple honest people. The rest of you are going to break it soon. Don't worry. No, I believe in you. I don't. I don't. Some of you can't. Okay. Oh, I broke it the next day. Oh, man. What do I do now? Right? Like that's kind of like the New Year's resolution, right? And so kind of when you think of these ideas of achieving it, the glorified body is all the things you want to do, you can do. Like, I want to worship God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, but I can't. I'm a half-hearted creature so often. I want to get up and pray in the morning and read. I want to delight in reading the Bible more than I delight in sin. I want to delight in obedience more than I delight in sin, but right now I have to walk by faith. I don't have this sensation often. But one day I'll have a glorified body that won't be full of insecurity. It won't be full of all these things. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Like, I'll have a body which lets me be fully me in the best way possible without any badness. Do you see how different an answer this is than saying, no, just you don't get to exist? Guys, I just want you to hold on to what we have. In the Hindu areas, it's interesting. Their views of abstinence are crazy because you have to be abstinent unless you want to have kids, but then before then you have to do all these chants and stuff. Okay. Women are super inferior in the sect, S-E-C-T. Women are expected to submit and be servants to their husbands, but not in the Christian way where husbands are supposed to love their wives like Christ loved the church. Women are supposed to obey, and that's just it. They're discouraged from doing things on their own, not because they're of this, they literally are lower value. They're regarded as prone to degradation. Women are, again, of little intelligence and untrustworthy. I'm quoting here and from some of the Hare Krishna stuff. And so their sect has come under heavy fire from feminists, obviously. But okay, let's just kind of take it all down. You got transcendental meditation. Here's their beliefs that we got to break apart in the last 7 minutes, okay? First, truth is not relative. Just you should know this. I mean, you're used to hearing this, but they say this, truth is relative. There's no such thing as absolute truth. And what's the answer? Are you absolutely sure about that? Right? That's the first part. So this is Hare Krishna, this is Hindu, this is everything. There's no absolute truth. I'm like, you sound pretty certain of that. Right? Like, how about this, the coexist sticker? Does that sticker exist with the one where you don't exist and only Jesus exists? Wait, no. Well, it doesn't seem like that works. Like, it's self-defeating. Right? It's a self-defeating statement. So it's literally a nonsense statement. Like, it literally can't make it. Like, if we were logical creatures, which we're not, it like wouldn't compute. It just doesn't work. Saying all truth is relative is not logically satisfying. And also, if all the categories are relative and made up, remember the whole process again. Why are you so good? Remember that thing I said, why haven't you raped and murdered? Well, it's bad for society. I'm like, so if it was legal, you would? No. But if murder is the same as love, if they're just different categories, the problem isn't sin. The problem is passion, whether it's happy passion or passions of murder. But there's no real difference. It's the same problem. In other words, the person happy about their birthday and the person super happy to murder someone both have the same problem, which is they're happy about things. They just need to not be happy. Okay. So you like birthdays, though? Yeah. I'm like, what about murder? No, I don't like any murders. Isn't that kind of weird? Why not? Do you see what I'm trying to say? So once you get array differences, people aren't living that way. They live as if there are differences. Do you see what I'm saying? They live as if they're good differences. And those things, don't miss this. Again, if one religion is right, then the others are wrong. If the coexist sticker is true, take the cross out because this isn't. Because Jesus says, I'm the only way, truth, and life. If he's not the only way, truth, and life, he's a liar or a lunatic, but in no case is he the Savior and the Lord he says he is. They can't just be both be true. Like, so right away, that's stupid. Like, that's stupid. It just doesn't work. Again, reincarnation is obviously plagued by problems. I mean, what do we mean by that? First of all, why do you get punished via karma for something that you can't remember that you did in your previous life? It's kind of convenient, right? Further, if the purpose is to rid humanity of its selfish desires, have you seen any improvement in humanity's selfish desires getting less? How about in India? You see any improvement of less selfish desires anywhere? It seems like it's failing miserably. I mean, if you've got a car that's supposed to bring you somewhere and it brries you backwards only and never to the place you're going to, you probably wouldn't say that's a good vehicle, so why would you still think this is a good vehicle for enlightenment? Anyways, and also if the laws of karma are so beneficial on a practical level, well, how would you explain the immense, ever-worsening social and economic problems in India, right? Including widespread poverty, starvation, disease, horrible suffering. How's reincarnation working out? And let's be honest here. I'm not saying the people aren't great, but the consequences of bad ideas harms people. It's the same reason. Again, you can go to Israel and you look at the border of Syria and the border of Israel and he's like, oh, look at Hamas and Gaza. Oh, wait, our plumbing doesn't work. Well, here, we'll send you plumbing. And then what do? They take that to make rockets. I wonder why our conditions are so bad. Your philosophy is wicked and evil. And we have to be bold enough to say, if Christ is true, then Gandhi is in hell. Do you know, he's not like, oh, he's a great guy. I'm sure he's better than me, but I'm not going to heaven because I'm a good guy. The stakes of what we're saying matter, guys. And so what we've done is we've romanticized the guru. We've romanticized the thing. And there's so many people that, like, the most unevangelized people in so many ways, in that 1040 window, like, there's so many people that don't know the Lord and they need to know, and their whole religion is just pressing down on them. And you know what we've done as Americans? We've exported yoga for like La Jolla and our yoga pants. We're like, this is great. I got a little bit of this too, but then I can go to my mansion. Like, it's sickening. It's sickening. As Christians, we have to understand like that what they teach, it doesn't go with what the Bible says. Again, an eternal destiny, again, the ultimate goal of absorption into Brahma versus like what the Bible promises are so worlds apart. And sometimes our apologetic isn't just saying nah or what about this. It's trying to help someone to see the imaginative structure of like, can you imagine what, like here's what your religion or these views are promoting. Like this is what it's promising. Is that what you believe in? Well, I guess it makes sense. Does it? Like what makes more sense? That history is cyclical and that you used to be a pirate and that's why you're here and that's why it happens. Oh, you have like, I don't know, cirrhosis. It's because you did something in your past life. Oh, you have, IBF. It's because you did something in your past life. Like, well, go to the doctor, fine, but it's all an illusion. Obviously, we've already critiqued pantheism and the rest, but again, when they say everything's God on the one hand, but that human beings are in need of enlightenment to realize they're God, well, that's not God. If you're ignorant of your godhood, you're just not God. God's not ignorant of anything. God doesn't learn anything. God is God. He's totally perfect already. Like, this just doesn't make sense. The fact that a person comes to realize your identity is God proves he's not God. For if he were God, he would never have passed from a state of ignorance to a state of enlightenment at who he is, because what kind of God is dumb or forgets things? The God I worship doesn't forget things. The God I worship doesn't need to become something. The God I worship is all. He's the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning, and the end. He's above any God that a Hindu religion makes up. Don't play patty cake with that, okay? Again, God cannot bud. He cannot blossom. He's always been in full bloom. God always has been God. He's always has been God before there was time and space. And God has always been distinct from finite creatures like human beings. You will never become like God. The very fact you think that shows you have such a low view of God and ultimately a low view of humans. Also, contrary to the Hindu teaching that Jesus was an enlightened person that didn't suffer, obviously he did, I already covered that. And then one last thing, meditation is stupid. No, why do I say this again? On purpose. No, when the Bible talks about meditation, it doesn't mean the same thing. The Bible says meditate on certain things. Now, I want to contrast what the Bible says. We're supposed to be transformed by the renewal of our minds. We're supposed to worship the Lord with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. In other words, worship of God is not something even, and let me say this, it's not something that happens when the music comes and it repeats itself and you just lose yourself in the rhythm. No. We worship God with our minds. And so it's a content-based religion that we're sober-minded and that we're supposed to set our hearts. We have the mind of Christ. We're supposed to think on these things. And so there's a purposefulness to it. God gave us minds. He wants us to think. We use our minds to create. We are worshiping God with our minds. That meditation upon the things of God are good. But Eastern meditation is literally being dumb. Get rid of your mind. Stop thinking. Empty your mind. Just repeat chants and mantras to make you not think. Bzzz. Literally to make you dumb. And here's what's so crazy. They've come up with all these experiments, and what they found is the longer you meditate, the more dumb you are. I'm sorry. One guy named Leon Otis of Stanford notes that some meditators developed increased anxiety, confusion, and depression. This is from Eastern meditation. The number and severity of complaints were positively related to the duration of meditation. That is to say that people who have been meditating for the longest report the most adverse effects. Again, the longer you meditate, the dumber you get. Why? Because you're sitting there doing nothing. Oh, it's great. You're not even sleeping. You're not even relaxing. You're not having Cheetos. You're not doing anything. You're sitting there doing nothing. It gets uncomfortable. That's an illusion. Researcher Gary Swartz found that too much meditation can hinder logical thought process. It's literally the point. So again, meditation, y'all, okay. As Christians, again, just they need to know the gospel, they need to know the truth, but again, they can't live it out. And so I think that the New Age sort of Eastern stuff needs to be laughed at and mocked in a loving manner. I don't know how else to say that, because they live in this world, and if someone's going to pretend to live in that world, do not let them back in this one until they recognize that the stuff they said was fake. They need the gospel, because heaven and hell are real, history is linear, and you're going one way or the other. And you guys, if this is true, you are the only ones with the truth. Let me pray. God, help us to be so compassionate and loving, winsome and bold to those that embrace the Hindu religion in whatever form. Protect us from romanticizing the gurus and the Hollywood romanticization that's made it seem spiritual or high. Help us see the human devaluing hopelessness. Help us to see the asceticism and severity. Help us to recognize it does nothing to make us better. Help us to realize we know we need to be born again. Help us to realize that annihilation is not our only hope, but God, you've given us a wonderful hope. Help us to be people of good news, and help us to be bold about it. In Jesus' name, amen. We'll see you next week.
This is Pastor Matt Smith, Senior Pastor of Barabbas Road Church. For the past 16 years, it has been my joy to equip the saints for the work of the ministry by preaching the Bible verse by verse, line by line, the whole counsel of God. Our audio and video messages have reached over 158 countries and are listened to by over 5,000 people each week. Many of you who listen weekly have been through our doors, and I'm thankful that you continue to use us as a resource for your enrichment and edification. We consider you all a part of our extended church family. As you know, San Diego is a spiritually dark and financially difficult place to exist as a local church, and yet, by God's plan and purpose, He's placed us here to boldly challenge the false faith by teaching that Jesus is the only way, truth, and life. My desire is that we would continue to be a bastion of light in this dark area, that we would keep bringing you consistent biblical teaching on a weekly basis. To that end, I'm asking that you would prayerfully consider partnering with us in your missions giving. To do so, go to Barabbas.com/give. I'm thankful for this task and look forward to our partnership for years to come.